So this time I didn't have time to look at all the comments or read through all the comments. I was a little busy preparing some of the diagrams. But from the little I saw, it still seems that people struggle with the idea of external existence. So Thomae very nicely mentioned the three characteristics for something existing conventionally, which we'll go through in some detail later as we reach the 6th chapter. So here it basically says that something is renowned. So the three characteristics for something to conventionally exist. Something is known to the world, something is renowned, if you like, people accept this. Then there is no contradiction when it comes to conventional valid cognition. Now that's pretty clear. Ordinarily, valid cognition, yeah, external existence, there's no problem. External versus internal. And then from the point of view of an ultimate valid cognition, a mind that realizes emptiness, there's also no contradiction. Now, from the impression I got was, from the messages I got the impression, or I read, I got the impression that emptiness seems to be difficult. The lack of intrinsic existence seems to be difficult to accept while accepting phenomena exist externally. So the difficulty of some person, I thought it was maybe Neil, I'm not sure, he seemed to imply that he has a hard time accepting that there is external existence while phenomena lack inherent existence or lack intrinsic existence. But then again, as Venerable Kumpen said, although we say that everything that exists that we ordinarily perceive to be external to the mind depends on the mind, but it doesn't exclusively depend on the mind. A table, as an object we accept to be externally existent, nevertheless depends also on its basis of labeling in order for the mind then to label or designate table. Which means our mind is not just making things up, just accepting one day this is a table for whatever reason or for no reason. No, there must be some basis of a designation, and therefore the mind labels table. Or whatever else the mind labels with regard to this particular object here in front of me. So external existence can be accepted, but I guess it goes further than that. More explanation is required. So being dependent on the mind doesn't mean phenomena that external to the mind cannot depend on mind. For something to depend on something that is external to itself doesn't mean there's a contradiction, right? I mean, we can depend on external things and they can still exist. I mean, we depend on lots of external objects, and nevertheless, we don't say they cannot exist external to ourselves because we depend on them, or the other way around, or they depend on us. We depend on other phenomena. That doesn't mean internal phenomena don't exist. The mind doesn't exist, although it's dependent on external phenomena. So similarly, because external phenomena depend on the mind, it doesn't mean external phenomena don't exist. Conventionally, there's no contradiction, there's no fault logically that there's an external world that we merely label. Of course, not an intrinsically existent, independently existent external world. Anyway, never mind. So let's go back to logic. The logic presented in, well, not in Lama Tsongkhapa's text, not in Lama Tsongkhapa's illuminating the intent, but it's assumed that everyone knows this logic. I mean, the whole debate that we'll do now is based on what is a consequence, what is a correct reason. Without understanding that, we won't understand the debate, which is why I thought it was a good moment to introduce these ideas. And usually a correct reason, a syllogism, is explained in more detail in different contexts, as part of different topics we study, such as science and reasoning or Pramanavartika. At least the first chapter is all about this, While here in this context, the debate is all about, is it a correct consequence or not? And since we know that one of the main characteristics of the consequentialist school is consequences, in that the consequentialist school, that is Acharya Chandrakirti and all the other followers of the Prasangika school, they assert in order to understand a phenomenon that is slightly hidden, we need reasoning, first of all. So pure observation is only helpful when it comes to obvious phenomena. When we can observe them, we see the world around us. We don't need reasoning to establish the existence of the things around us that we can see or hear and so on. However, then there are phenomena that are slightly hidden to us. Not just because we have ignorance in terms of inherent existence, but also sometimes they're too small. Subtle atoms, the existence of subtle atoms. We cannot perceive subtle atoms. We cannot even observe them, because from a Buddhist point of view, using a particular microscope that allows us to see, what is it called? Is it called an atomic microscope? Is there an atomic microscope? Yeah, you can see subtle atoms, can't you? Pardon? Like, yeah, certain microscopes, I thought. Anyway, so you're still not seeing the actual subtle atom. You see something that represents an expanded version of an atom, but the atom is so tiny, you know, you're not actually seeing that. You're seeing, in Tibetan, that you would say a reflection. It's not literally a reflection, it's a representation of an atom. Anyway, so there are different reasons why certain phenomena are hidden to us. And do we have to learn to know all these phenomena? No, fortunately not. A lot of things we don't need to learn to understand, or we don't need to realize subtle atoms in order to become enlightened. Once we're enlightened, we know them anyway. But there are certain things we do need to know, and that is emptiness, for instance, subtle impermanence. Those we have to realize. And according to the Buddhist texts, we can only newly realize them in dependence on reasoning, through inferring their existence. Now, as we've heard last time, and we're going more into details on that, there are two ways by which we can access something that is slightly hidden, such as emptiness or impermanence. But these two ways, one is a consequence or are consequences, and the second are syllogisms. In the Prasangika school, they say, yes, syllogisms are helpful. A is B because it's C kind of, or X is Y because it's Z. That kind of logical statement is helpful, but even more helpful is consequences that present our inconsistent views, our mistakes. Because in the end, we don't realize emptiness because we have contradictory views. No surprise, when we think about emptiness, when we reflect on emptiness, whether in a class setting or at home reading a book or even meditating, we seem to see inconsistencies. We come to a point where we go, well, it can't be right, because then this problem arises. It's not tenable because of this, because of that. So we see contradictions simply because we hold on to intrinsic existence, and that view colors or influences the way we see the world. And accessing this way we see the world with the reasoning that negates intrinsic existence, that refutes intrinsic existence, leads to a contradiction. Now, to overcome these contradictions, that's the challenge. We can do this on our own, but even more effective in the beginning is, for instance, in the setting of a debate or with the teacher or in whichever other way you choose to do so, is to present consequences to us. I mean, if we're presented with correct consequences. If you say this, then this absurdity follows, this absurdity follows, this follows, and so on. And this is what we're learning about right now. Now, we use these consequences all the time. We even use syllogisms all the time. What is difficult is we never think about them. what do they consist of? I mean, people, when they discuss with each other, they use them all the time. They see the contradiction in something, and then they point out these contradictions, whether always in exactly the same form of syllogism, kind of in the structure that is presented here is something different, but in the end they use them. Or the classic example with the syllogism, not with the consequence, but the syllogism would be, there's fire over there because there's smoke. We may not say, take the subject, my neighbor's house, there is a fire, but we're thinking it. I mean, we're in as it would in Tibetan, you would say, as to its like in meaning, in actuality, we're using a syllogism. And I would argue we also use consequences. Okay. But it helps to have them presented in this kind of structured way to be able to use them even more consistently, which is why I thought to introduce it. But not just that, also, of course, to understand the debate that is to follow. All right, so let's look at what page are we on? Pardon? Is it 151? No, I think we've got 153, right? Yeah. Yes, 153, right? Okay. Now, what we've learned previously, that for something to be a correct consequence, certain positions need to be held by the person to whom the consequence is directed. So one assertion would be that, well, when you look at the consequence itself, the consequence that you project or that you direct towards someone, that someone must accept the reason, that someone must accept the provision, and that someone must hold the opposite of the thesis. Now, for that, it may be helpful to look at the material I sent you, because what I'm saying right now, unless you're a little familiar with the terminology, it may be too overwhelming. Let me just look for it. I can't find it right now. Where are the diagrams? The diagrams of the... How strange. It's not on my iPad, although I created it on the iPad. But for some reason it's not there. Huh. The diagram. Where's the diagram? Sorry, I'm just going to search for it. Oh, no. Now I remember. I did that with this program, of course. I did this with, what's it called, GoodNotes, because I had to... Yeah, there it is. Oh, I only have a PDF file. No, I found it. I found it in this app I'm using. Now, in here, if you look at the PDF file, the first one called diagram, where actually there are more than, it's not just a diagram, it's diagrams of correct consequences and syllogisms. It may be easier if you see it with the three parts. There's a subject, that's the basis. Then you have a predicate and you have a reason. With the variables, it may be a little bit harder, like taking X, Y, and Z. Yeah, I realize that it's a little bit unusual. We don't really think along X, Y, and Z, so that makes it a little harder to follow. But it may be helpful to use an example, which is why I used an example which is not usually mentioned in the texts. I mean, the fact that we may die tomorrow, of course, is mentioned, but usually when you have a consequence mentioned in the text, usually they have the same kind of examples or similar examples they traditionally use. But I thought this was an example we can all relate to. An example where we intellectually understand I could die tomorrow, but emotionally I feel no way I'm going to die tomorrow. Can you all relate to that? Right? Yes. So if that's the last thing on my mind, like usually we plan ahead and we've got a lot of things we want to do, and so the day's too full for death. And anyway, we haven't prepared anything, so it's like, oh my God, haven't cleaned, haven't given away all this stuff that we never use, but it's still collecting in our cupboard. So we're basically not prepared, and therefore don't assume it's going to happen. Which means there's a contradiction here. Look, there's a very obvious contradiction here. We hold three mutually contradictory positions. So one is the reason of the consequence is established. So take the subject I being a human being. Now it sounds a little awkward the way I formulated it, simply because I tried to reflect the Tibetan here, in that the subject, when the subject is mentioned, in this case I, you don't need to mention I again in the predicate or in the reason. So you could say, take the subject John. It follows that there's a possibility of dying tomorrow. Actually, it should be of him dying tomorrow. But I tried to avoid that. In Tibetan, you don't need to say him. There's a possibility of death coming tomorrow to him, of course, because of being a human being, because John is a human being. Now, ideally in Tibetan, you can exchange the subject and the predicate, and the reason works just as well. But here it's because of the possibility of dying tomorrow. First I had take the subject I could die tomorrow. So then I have I twice, so there's no point. So I slightly changed it. But never mind. Here, the reason of the consequence is established. So I hold the position that the reason of the consequence is established. Here, it's just a matter of opinion here. I'm convinced I'm a human being. I know I'm a human being. So, yeah. And I'm also convinced, having been a Buddhist for a while, being a human being means, or whoever is a human being, could possibly die tomorrow. So this pervasion thing, some people say the reason pervades the predicate. That's wrong. The reason does not pervade the predicate. Very important. Yes.
Just to say, in the chat there was a question, what means pervasion?
Yeah, I know. Yes.
Maybe that would be helpful for some.
Exactly. That's what I thought to mention. I think Hella wrote about what is pervade, and then she used the German word, but it's just as confusing even if you have the German word, like permeate, or I don't know. No, but let's take a simple example. Maybe being a human and there's a possibility of dying, it's too wordy. But let me ask you, is it true that whoever is a man is necessarily human? Would you agree? Whoever is a man, whoever is a woman is necessarily human. Or whoever is an animal, or whatever is a table is necessarily impermanent. Okay. So does being a table pervade impermanence? What do you think? I said not, so now you know it's wrong.
It feels strange.
Pardon?
It also feels strange.
It's very strange.
Yes.
It's
Every table is impermanent, but not everything that is impermanent is a table.
That is true, but I want you to use the word pervade in this context. In Tibetan, you always use the word pervade. How would you use the word pervade? Using table and existence. So we always start with the bottom. We always start with the end. Whatever is a table is necessarily impermanent. That's one way of putting it. But how can you put it? How can you say the same thing using the word pervade? Is the table perverted? Does the table pervade impermanence? No, it doesn't. It should be, and this is how it's said in Tibetan, that whatever is a table is pervaded by impermanence. It's pervaded by impermanence. In other words, the category table, any table, when you look at the category of table as like, if you look at a table as a category, then impermanence pervades the entire category of table. In other words, any table must be impermanent. But it's not the other way around, as Rika said. Whatever is impermanent doesn't have to be a table, because tableness does not pervade all impermanent things. Right? So to understand this better, I sent you another diagram called the Venn diagram. Venn was some English, his name was John Venn. He was a philosopher and something else. Forget what he was else. He was a philosopher, that's for sure. A logician, that's right. A Western logician and a philosopher. And so he came up with depicting kind of logical ideas, mathematical ideas in the form of circles, which is so helpful because in Buddhist logic, this is one of the most important things you need to understand in Buddhist logic. If you understand that, everything else becomes easy. That whatever exists has a relationship with everything else that exists by way of in four ways. One of the four ways, so take A can be anything. A has a relationship with anything else in one of those four ways. There's only one of the four. You cannot have a relationship more than one of those four. I mean, one of those. It can only ever be a relationship that is one of the four. It could not be two of the four, because these relationships are contradictory to each other. So either two things are equivalent, mean the same thing, right? You have A and B, and they mean the same thing. So, for instance, being impermanent and being a product. I chose this because it's such a classical kind of example, and it's also important to understand the syllogism that I used and the consequence that I used. What does product mean? Product just means it has arisen from its own causes and conditions. Only something impermanent has arisen from its own causes and conditions. In other words, impermanent means it's a dynamic thing that keeps constantly changing, with the former moment being the cause of the next moment, this is very helpful, especially Atzalea. She's mentioned this kind of process philosophy, that nothing exists as something solid and constant and concrete the way it appears to us. And just understanding impermanence really understands undoing that sense we have of reality, that everything else around us, think of the subtle atoms that make this environment we're in right now. It seems very concrete and very solid, but it's not at all. It's whizzing away, like these atoms, these electrons, neutrons, and so forth. They're whizzing, around us. They're in constant movement. Nothing is ever the same. And it's really this wall that seems so solid is made up of subtle things that are not solid at all. In fact, there's more empty space there than there is actual substance. And again, this constant movement is important to consider, in particular when it comes to impermanence. So every moment of the wall is different to the next moment, because the atoms have changed. They've changed their position, they've changed their structure, and so forth. Now, that being the case, therefore, whatever is such a dynamic thing has arisen from causes and conditions, and therefore it must change. Very important concept in Buddhism, that everything is constantly changing. And how can it change? How do things change in dependence on other things? Therefore, if something exists and changes, it cannot exist intrinsically because it's changing, and that means it depends on other things. Think of the environment around you. Think of a garden. How could a flower change from moment by moment? Could a flower change moment by moment unless there was oxygen and warmth and, certain chemicals in the form of nutrition, fertilizer, and so forth? Right? So this particular object, a flower, if you single out this one object, Well, it does change moment by moment, but only because there are things other than the flower that interact with every part of the flower and allow for its cells to constantly change. Does that make sense? Now just take science, just take biology, the way we've learned it in school, how the cells of the flowers are constantly in movement, new, I don't know, chemicals entering the flowers, and I don't know, whatever, meiosis or whatever happens, words I kind of remember from school. But because there are other things coming in, and therefore these other things serving as a cause, an earlier moment becoming a later moment. Now, when we talk about cause and effect, sometimes we keep it very simple. You have a seed, and then you have a sprout. As if it was that simple. No, actually each moment of a seed is different from the former moment. The former moment of seed gives rise to the next moment of seed. And then slowly, this seed transforms into a sprout. With each moment of the seed being different, each moment of the sprout being different. And I've used one analysis in the past, one example in the past. I said, take that process of the seed transforming into the sprout. Let's say it takes 12 hours. And I take photographs of every minute of this process of the seed transforming into the sprout. Let's take photographs. I take photographs every minute. So in 12 hours, you can do the math. It's hundreds of photographs. And I put them up on a long washing line that goes all the way around McLeod. And I ask you to choose, when is the seed no longer a seed, and when is the first moment of the sprout? Can you imagine you're walking past that washing line, going all the way to Drummer Chalk and Tibet Kitchen and anywhere else, where I set up these photographs. And you need to have a piece of paper and a pen, and I ask you to choose the picture that's the last moment of the seed and the first moment of the sprout. Is that an easy decision? Are you all going to agree? No surprise, because it doesn't exist intrinsically as a seed or a sprout. If it did, there would be a right answer, right? If it did intrinsically exist as a seed and a sprout, you could get it wrong in that, if there is if it's moment 5,000, whatever, whichever moment that is, or photograph, photo 800 or whatever it is, okay, so let's say it existed intrinsically, yes, then it would be a specific photo. But if it doesn't exist intrinsically and is merely labeled, it's a matter of opinion. But usually when we think of a seed, it's that one thing, and then there's a sprout over there, and the decision seems easy. I mean, who makes an effort to take these hundreds of photographs and ask anyone to decide? But this is what ultimate analysis is all about. Take things apart. Go on such a level where you take each moment, as in this case, and you decide which one is the last moment of a seed and which one is the first moment of the sprout.
But that's what science do. They give a definition, what is still a seed and what would be the first.
All right, so science would define it. Okay, science would define it. Please give me the definition of science. What is a seed and what is a sprout? And do you think every scientist...
When you look about a growing person, baby in the belly, it's very fun.
No, I'm talking about seeds and sprout, not babies in the. Okay, just give me the definition.
It's a little cell and it is going more and more, and then there's a moment.
All right, so Doris is saying science very clearly defines what a seed and what a sprout is. Give me that clear definition. Because we think they do. They have this clear-cut definition because they're scientists, they're clever. They have all the answers, right? No, I'm exaggerating a little bit. But even scientists will have a hard time determining exactly which one is the seed and when does the seed stop and when does the sprout start, right? They have a great definition. Just a second. They come to a general, very good. What's your name?
Craig.
That's right, Craigslist Craig. As Craig said, yes, absolutely. They come to a general consensus, but that general consensus still doesn't help us to decide which of these photographs is still the seed and which one is still the sprout, right? Just for the sake of Tomer, I'm talking about the seed and the sprout, transforming. I take pictures of every moment and put up So again, this idea, we need to choose the exact moment, last moment of seed and first moment of sprout. Yes, a general consensus, and that's helpful, but it's only that, a general estimate. Or take a baby in the womb, take lots of photographs. When is it a fetus? When is it an embryo? Which exact moment is the moment when it's no longer? Again, take lots of pictures in the womb and decide. Generally, we can say, oh, yesterday was a fetus or whatever, the next day it's something else. We can decide on that. But with each moment, we can't do that. Simply because it doesn't exist in and of itself as such. It's a matter of general consents, general conventions, because it only exists conventionally as an embryo, as a fetus, and so forth. From its own side, it's not like saying, oh, now I'm right? No. Anyway, I'm bringing in emptiness here as well, but without thinking about emptiness, think of each moment of this fetus, think of each moment of seed changing to sprout. It's not that they're clear delineations, they're just mind created. It's just a constant change. There's just change. And over time, that change becomes obvious to us in such a way that we call it something different, just to be able to communicate clearly. But in the end, so the former moment is the cause of the next moment. In other words, anything that changes exists of endless moments that are constantly changing, with former moments being the causes of later moments. Which is why whatever is impermanent is a product. It's a product of its former moment. It has arisen from its former moment as one cause, and other external conditions that help this first moment, that former moment, to transform into the present moment, right? The former moment, myself, for instance, myself right now, I am the product of a former moment of myself. The self, the person I was an hour ago. So the self I was an hour ago consists of mind and body. My body has changed, my mind has changed. My mind an hour ago is not the same mind I have now. And that change from an hour ago's I to present I was only possible because there were other factors. Well, at least oxygen, because I didn't hold my breath for an hour and survived. No way. So oxygen and the things I saw around me, all that influenced my mental aggregate as well as my physical aggregate. So my former self is the cause of my present self, and the fact that it transformed into my present self is possible because of other conditions. This is a very important idea of impermanence and being a product of causes and conditions. We always say causes and conditions. Cause usually implies the former moment of a continuum, because everything is a continuum. You yourself are a continuum. We don't talk like that, but actually we are all continua, consisting of different moments. But for that continuum to change, you need other things as well, conditions, they're called. Okay. Once I've explained that, I hope you get some kind of mental picture of everything being a continuum, constantly changing, former moments being the causes of later moments, and these later moments being the results and therefore the products of their former moments. Does that make sense? Does a clear picture arise in your mind? And all these continue constantly interacting with each other, influencing each other. Which is why impermanent and product are synonymous. Whatever is a product must be impermanent. Whatever is impermanent must be a product. Okay, so that's equivalence here. But not everything that exists, no two things are always equivalent. There's also the possibility that whatever is A is necessarily B, but whatever is B is not necessarily A. That one is called, and this is called What is the distinction between, when you use the word pervasion, how would you describe A and B? If whatever is A is necessarily B, but whatever is B is not necessarily A. Is there a word that comes to mind?
A pervades B.
Pardon?
A pervades B.
Well, whatever is A is necessarily B, so A is pervaded by B. If A is necessarily B, then A does not pervade B. A is pervaded by B.
Yeah.
Yeah? And A and B is the greater pervader. That's a word that's used in English. You use the word greater pervader. So look at the circles. Which is the greater pervader? Impermanent or mind? Which circle is greater? Which circle is bigger? Impermanent. Impermanent is the wider category. It pervades more things. So you see how the word pervade is not totally random, some weird Tibetan word that doesn't make any sense. Actually makes perfectly sense. When you think of a category pervading other categories. Impermanent is a category in that it includes many impermanent things. Anything that is impermanent is part of this category. Mind is a slightly smaller category in that there are things that are impermanent but that are not mind. With this Venn diagram, I think it becomes pretty clear how one the greater pervader, the greater circle, right? I mean, it pervades more things than mind does. Which means, therefore, mind is pervaded by impermanent. Impermanent is not pervaded by mind because not every instant of impermanent is a mind. Does that make sense? So now pervasion kind of makes sense, even in English. And in Tibetan, pardon?
You said pervaded, but you also use pervades.
Um,
And we say mind.
okay, so
Mind pervades.
I said something in the very beginning when I said whatever is mind is necessarily impermanent, right? So I ask, use the word pervade when you're trying to establish this. Is it that mind pervades impermanent, or is it, in Tibetan you say, Semina mitakbayin bekyap. Semina mitakbayin bekyap. So translate that. I wouldn't ask any of you, unless I knew you knew some Tibetan. How would you translate that?
Semina,
Mind.
like if it is
Semina mitakbayin bekyap.
if it is mind, it is impermanent.
No, use the word pervade. I use the word pervade in Tibetan.
Yeah.
Kyap means pervade. Semina mitabayin bekyap. So now use the word pervade. But make sure you don't use it.
If it is mind, it pervades impermanent.
Ah, you see, he makes exactly that mistake. If it is mind, it pervades impermanent. No. It's actually semina mitakba yim bekyap. It actually means it is pervaded by being impermanent. If it is, not that whatever is mind pervades impermanent. No, whatever is mind is pervaded by being impermanent. Sem yina mitakba yimbe basabe yimbe kyap. Right, and it can be easily it's mistranslated sometimes. It's sometimes mistranslated. It literally means, I don't know whether I bore you with this, but I want to make sure pervasion makes sense. Whatever is impermanent is pervaded by, no, sorry, I can say again. Whatever is mind is pervaded by being impermanent. Whatever is a mind is pervaded by impermanent or is pervaded by being impermanent. Which means that any mind has the property of being impermanent. It's totally pervaded. So pervaded as in like if minds were a room, if you put all the minds in this room and you were to add impermanence into this room, if it applies to all the minds in this room, then the room would be totally pervaded by impermanence. Does that make sense? Maybe that's not a good analogy. This pervade is so weird. If any mind, I don't know, pervade. How do you use the word pervade in English? Yeah, please help me. Pervade.
I'm not going to have your on, but pervasion, okay, so ever-changing continuum is pervasion, so in the continuum, and then that's mind. So is that greater? Is pervasion greater than the mind? So the ever-changing, everything changing is greater than...
It entails, the word entail is probably better. So any mind is entailed by being impermanent. Does that help? Covered.
Being present through something, throughout something.
I think the word pervade is not the problem. It's just pervaded by, and it pervades. It's just the opposite.
Yes.
Yeah.
So pervaded by, I mean, it's kind of like,
You have to say pervaded by, or can you not just say...
well, if you want to understand the Tibetan, because pervasion, you see, this is something you learn in Buddhist logic. If something pervades, right, you have a pervader and that which is pervaded. Does that make sense? If there's a pervasion, here in this case, we talk about two things in terms of pervasion. So one is the pervader and one is pervaded.
So that you can say in two different ways, can't you?
Yes, you can, but it has to be said in a way that it makes sense.
Well, I think for most people it would make sense to say that...
Does mind... Yes, impermanent, it pervades mind, but mind does not pervade impermanent, right? Yeah, exactly. So how would you put that in a different way? Mind is pervaded by impermanent, or there's two. You see, the reason I say it in this complicated way, mind is pervaded by impermanent. Why am I not saying impermanent pervades mind? Because traditionally you start from the bottom. You start from the end of the syllogism. Does that make sense? No. No. No problem. Okay, so what's that syllogism? Anger is impermanent because it's mind.
You mean the reason? The bottom is the reason.
The bottom is the reason, yeah. So if you talk about the order of the syllogism is take the subject anger, it is impermanent because it's a mind. Or take the subject anger, it follows that it's impermanent because it's a mind. Both are logical statements with three parts to it, and both here express a pervasion. In the case of a correct syllogism, it has to be in accordance with reality. So is this logically correct to say, take the subject mind, it is impermanent because and take the subject anger, it's impermanent because it's a mind. Would you say it's correct? Yeah, everyone agrees, you hear it, it makes sense. Take the subject, my neighbor's house, there is fire because there's smoke. Would you all agree? It's a correct syllogism, isn't it? No? Rika, you don't agree? What's wrong with it? There's a pervasion in my neighbor's house. So there is, I'm talking about my neighbor actually having smoke billowing out of their window. So that neighbor's house, out of which smoke billows, take that as a subject. It follows there's a fire inside because there's smoke. Now, here, the pervasion is always expressed by starting at the bottom. Whatever is the reason is pervaded by. It has to be pervaded by. So whatever is a mind is pervaded by being impermanent. An easier way would be saying impermanent pervades mind. That is true. But since you always start with the bottom, you mention mind first in this case. So take the subject, anger. It is impermanent because it's mind. Whatever is mind is pervaded by being impermanent. So that's what it says in Tibetan. And it makes perfectly sense, doesn't it? Since you start from the bottom, traditionally, you start from the end. Pardon? What did you say? I didn't...
Whether it makes sense.
Maybe in Tibetan it makes sense.
No, in Tibetan, it doesn't make sense to someone who's not familiar with it. But as a Tibetan, you also have to learn that. That was my advantage when I started to debate, because I couldn't speak, but I could debate a little bit. I had a teacher who told me, who said, I teach you Tibetan through debate. So we did that for about, 2 months, and I could still not speak, but I could debate. So the IBD start a new program. I joined the program. I could debate with my classmates. I couldn't talk to them. But the good thing was that we were equal. We were pretty equal. They were just as confused in the beginning about this debate language. But after a while, you get used to it, right? Saying if you want to express the pervasion, you start with the bottom. You start with the reason. You say whatever is mind, in this case, mind and impermanent, it is necessarily pervaded by impermanent.
German is durchdringen? Or?
Yeah, Durchdringung.
Pardon? Durchdringen. Yes, durchdringen. Are you German or Russian?
No German, no Russian. I'm born in North Macedonia, but I'm living and working in Germany.
So you speak German. Okay, all right. Okay, therefore, sorry, I don't even know why I thought you were Russian. Okay, so the point is here, impermanent and mind, right? So you see which one is the greater pervader. But again, pervader, it sounds like a Star movie, kind of like dark, yeah, something, right? Yeah. No, but it's like pervade. It pervades a category. So maybe that makes sense. It pervades a category because it has more instances of something impermanent in that way. Okay. Hopefully that's a little bit clearer. So,
Can you say why you said they start from the bottom? Like, what is the reason for starting from the bottom?
I don't know. Maybe that was the way it was done in India. It was passed on to. You see, the debate method, the logic that is used for debate, that existed in India before, I suppose. So I don't know. Maybe you start with the beginning in order to express the syllogism, and not to get too confused. You start with the bottom to express the pervasion. Can't tell you why. Why historically they came.
It feels like this. Tibetan, no?
Pardon?
It feels like Chris going.
Yeah, exactly. It goes. Yes. So when you have like a whole drawing, I didn't add that to the diagram, but when you express, for instance, that the subject is the reason is the property of the subject. So, in other words, when you say anger is a mind, right? The syllogism is take the subject anger. It's impermanent because it's a mind. So first of all, it needs to be established that anger is a mind. So you basically would draw a line. Okay, anger is a mind. And to establish the pervasion, you go from, right? So whatever is mind is necessarily pervaded by, I could actually add that to your diagram. Yeah, but so you get so used to it. If you had to start in the middle, right? It's impermanent is in the middle. So impermanent, that's even more complicated. You have the beginning, you have the end, and then you take in the middle the pervasion to express the pervasion. You could also say impermanent pervades mind. That is possible. But then you start in the middle. So maybe they felt it was easier to start with the end. I don't know.
A lot of Indian logic is the other way around, Western logic.
There's a lot of it. Well, even in Tibetan logic, there's something very confusing, which initially doesn't immediately make sense. But if whatever is mind is necessarily, and this is also how it's expressed actually, it's not just saying whatever is mind is pervaded by impermanent. Actually, it makes much more sense to say whatever is a mind is necessarily impermanent. That's an easier way of saying it. Except in Tibetan, we're so used to, you say both. You say both. Sometimes you say whatever is mind is necessarily pervaded by being impermanent. Sometimes you say whatever is mind is necessarily impermanent. You say both. And in the second case, it makes sense you start with mind. Whatever is a mind must be. Any instance of mind must be impermanent. But what's confusing here is that if that is true, then it has to be true when you switch it around. Whatever is mind is necessarily impermanent. If something is not impermanent, it's necessarily not a mind. So that's always true. That's always true. If you say whatever is A is necessarily B, then it's also true that whatever is not B is necessarily not A. It's always logically true.
So the ethos of pervasion.
That's the counter-pervasion. They call that the counter-pervasion. So they have a forward pervasion, although you start from the back. But forward not in the sense of not starting from the back, but forward in the sense saying it in an affirmative way, the way it is also expressed in the syllogism. And then you have a counter-pervasion where you say, okay, if whatever is a mind must be impermanent, then whatever is not impermanent cannot be a mind. Makes sense, right? But the not confuses us because we're not used to, we're not used to using negatives. But that's a good training because we have to understand emptiness, and that is anything but a negation.
Anything
So,
but
but-
negation, so
It's nothing else but a negation. It's a non-affirming negation. That sentence can be understood this way.
not negation.
No, it's just a negation. Okay. Anyway, so this is a little bit of, I don't know whether you really want to learn about logic, but everything is based on this. So it's like when the teacher speaks, like, you know, if you get a teaching from a Lama, for instance, who studied logic, and they usually have, you miss so much. You miss out on so much. You might as well know a little bit to know why they talk like that. Okay. Anyway, I'm sure you all understand what is your main obstacle is the language. That's your main obstacle. Once you get, 100%. Because you're using this logic all the time. If I ask you, is whatever is pizza is food? What are you going to say? Yes or no? Is whatever is pizza is food? Yeah, you'll say no. You don't have to think about it. If I say is whatever is food, whatever is pizza is pervaded by being food, you know, then it's like, oops. And then when I say whatever is not food is not necessarily not pizza, you need to, you know, move your way around the knots. Not the K-N-O-T knots, but the N-O-T knots. You see, it's just a matter of language being difficult. You use this logic all the time. If you didn't know that, you wouldn't be able to live in this world. And you'd be eating, I don't know, stones thinking it's food because you think whatever is a stone is necessarily food. I mean, you're not doing that, right? Okay, so impermanent and product are the same. Impermanent and mind, they have this relationship where one is pervading the other, but the other does not pervade the one. Okay? And that is described as three possibilities, where you have something that is both, but also the two, one pervades the one and the other does not pervade the first one. So anyway, if you read it, it's very clear. Then you have four possibilities. There's this four possibilities. And again, the Venn diagram beautifully describes it, where whatever is A is not necessarily B, but whatever is B is also not necessarily A. But there's something that is both A and B. Now I show sometimes in the Venn diagrams that you find in other contexts, they use everyday kind of objects. I don't want to use everyday objects. I don't care whether you know the possibilities between pizzas and whatever else. I want you to understand this material. So I just used an affliction and non-virtues. Is whatever is an affliction non-virtues? No, you know it's not. Right? It cannot be, because our self-grasping mind is the affliction, is the main affliction. But that affliction gives rise to virtuous actions. Right? My self-grasping mind makes me practice generosity because I want to accumulate good karma to have enough money in the future, kind of thing. I mean, that's what we start off with. When as beginners, as us now as beginners, we practice generosity not because it comes natural. Natural is to hold on to my stuff, right? It's a natural, that comes out of our self-grasping. But still, out of self-grasping, this is why the Buddha was so skillful teaching karma in the beginning. Oh, we're all self-grasping. We want the best for ourselves. Well, then teach karma at the beginning, because I want the best for myself. So I'm going to observe the law of karma, and I'm going to be generous to have enough money in the future. Right? So, therefore, wait just a second. So, therefore, there are virtuous actions that come from our root misconception, and it couldn't be non-virtuous. Non-virtuous minds don't lead directly to virtuous actions, but neutral minds do. Therefore, the root misconception is neutral, although it's the main troublemaker, but it's not non-virtuous. It in itself does not create suffering, the suffering of suffering, but it gives rise to anger and therefore to the suffering of suffering, and therefore it's anger itself or hatred is described as non-virtuous. Does that make sense? So whatever is an affliction, is not necessarily non-virtuous. But whatever is non-virtuous is also not an affliction. For instance, the act of killing, the intentional act of killing. Did I say intentional? The physical act of killing. I should say but actually the non-virtue of killing, I think intentional is better. The intentional physical act of killing, I should add that. So that is non-virtuous, but it's not an affliction. It depends on an affliction, yes. But I didn't ask that. I said, is whatever is non-virtuous necessarily an affliction? No, the volitional act of physically killing someone. All right. And is there something that's both an affliction and non-virtuous? Yes, hatred. Is there something that is neither an affliction nor non-virtuous? Yes, bodhicitta. That makes all perfectly sense. And I'm pretty sure all of you go, yeah, that makes sense. Yeah, but why all this? That's the confusing part. You're not familiar with this yet. And then there's the last of the four relationships. Two things are contradictory. There's nothing, no common locus. There's nothing which is both of them. Previously, you always had something that is both, right? In the first case, when they're mutually inclusive, when they're synonymous, well, table is both of them. In the second case, mind and impermanent, well, my mind is impermanent, it's a mind, so there's something that's both. In the third case, well, hatred is both an affliction and non-virtuous. In the last case, mind and body, there's nothing that's a mind and there's nothing that's both mind and body. In other words, there's nothing that's both non-physical and physical, because that's what mind means. Mind is necessarily non-physical, body is necessarily physical. Is there something that's both physical and non-physical? No. You see, you can all think logically. That's why I keep saying, if I can do it, you can all do it. You just need to get past the confusion. And the confusion is the words, is the structure that we're just not used to. If you learned this in school, if you were trained in logic, learning mathematics and science and so forth on this logic, it'll be so easy. So to TCV's children, they've been learning this as a tool to learn math and so forth, right? So, I don't know, they learn things such as what is the difference, what is the relationship between a human cell and a cell? Are they equivalent? 3 possibilities, 4 possibilities, or Rika, she already knows. I say 3 possibilities and she nods. Venerable Kumbin does too. So you go. 3 possibilities. Whatever is a human cell is necessarily a cell. Whatever is a cell is not necessarily a human cell. And there's something that's both. Right? My human cell.
And there's something that's neither.
Pardon?
And there's something that's neither.
There's something that's neither, but with the 3 possibilities, that's just not mentioned. Only for the 4 possibilities. Never mind. See, it gets too confusing if it's 4 possibilities in all 4 cases, so they don't say that. Yes. Okay. So you see, therefore, those are the 4 relationships. Again, if you memorize that, that's what debate does. Even if we don't formulate, when we didn't formally memorize that, we did actually in preparation. But even if we hadn't, sooner or later you pick it up and you never forget again. And in the debate, you do this a few times, a few months, and you know it. You don't need to think much about it. And then things become so much easier. Because of these 4 relationships, which of those allow for a pervasion and which one don't?
Allows.
So in other words, which of these 4 relationships, when you take the 2, A and B, right? I used A and B, there's a pervasion. That whatever is A is necessarily B, or whatever is B is necessarily A. Which of those?
Exclusive is no pervasion, all others do.
Pardon?
If it's exclusive, like contradictory, there's no pervasion.
If it's contradictory, if 2 things are contradictory, there's no pervasion. Very good. Whatever is a body is not necessarily a mind, and whatever is a mind is not necessarily a body. So if they're contradictory, no way you can use both to establish that one is the other, right? You can never establish, my mind is a body because it's a mind. It's never a correct reason, because whatever is a mind is never a body.
And
Yes.
all other three, there's always one version, like inclusive is always,
Be careful. Think first. Think first.
is always with a pervasion.
Okay, so which of these four allow for a pervasion? How many of these allow for a pervasion? One is already out. If they're contradictory, there cannot be a pervasion. One cannot pervade the other. So how many are you left with that a pervasion is possible? Three.
I think two.
Okay, so she's saying three. Tomea, how many are you saying? Two. Which of those two would that be?
Mutually inclusive and free modes.
Okay, so Rika is still saying number three. So that would mean whatever is one is necessarily the other.
With anger and with non-virtuous.
Anger and non-virtuous. So it would mean that whatever is anger is necessarily non-virtuous, or whatever is non-virtuous is necessarily anger.
No, but if we have four moves, there's always one that has a pervasion, not all four.
Which one? Take anger and affliction. Where's the pervasion? With anger and affliction, right? That's four possibilities. Where's the pervasion?
Every anger is an affliction.
No, affliction and non-virtuous.
No. Non-virtuous, sorry, I said anger. Non-virtuous, and of the four possibilities, I misspoke. But anyway, the example here is non-virtuous and affliction, right? So you're saying with the four possibilities, there is a pervasion. Okay, so tell me which pervasion it is. Take the two, affliction and non-virtuous.
Hatred is pervaded by non-virtuous.
Not anger, I didn't say anger. Non-virtuous and affliction.
Non-virtuous.
Here, read number three. Between A and B, there are four possibilities. For example, an affliction and non-virtuous. An affliction and non-virtuous.
No, but the thing pervaded is a hatred, no?
No. I'm comparing. I'm not comparing anger and affliction. I'm comparing affliction and non-virtuous. Whatever, right? Look, just read through. Whatever's an affliction is not necessarily non-virtuous. Okay, Rika, please, which one pervades which?
But we give examples for these things.
I give you an example of four possibilities. That is affliction and non-virtuous. You said of the four relationships, three allow for a pervasion. If it does, then what about affliction and non-virtuous? Which pervades which?
But if we have four moves, like when we have four opportunities,
Four possibilities, yeah.
four possibilities,
Yeah.
then not all four allow for pervasion, but we give examples for something that is both.
Okay, but then show me, if there's something that is both, then please express the pervasion.
Okay, something that is both an affliction and a non-virtue.
No, but I'm
is
saying,
anger.
no.
And anger that
No. I'm saying A and B. A and B. Is there a pervasion between A and B? The four possibilities.
It's a little bit in the middle. Yes and no.
That little bit.
Seems to pervade both.
Yeah. But that's not the two that have four possibilities, right? The hatred in the center is just an example of something that is both. But with the four possibilities, none pervades the other. So you have to take A and B, right? A and B are affliction and non-virtuous. Those two. And the other doesn't pervade one. There is something that is both, but one doesn't pervade the other. The four possibilities is the most difficult in this context. So just because there's something that is both, it doesn't mean that whatever is non-virtuous is necessarily an affliction, or whatever is an affliction is necessarily non-virtuous.
but the example we had for
I didn't talk about the example.
No, I'm just trying to understand
Yeah,
the example that we take for this
Yes,
that
yes.
has a pervasion.
That's true.
Okay,
The example is true. Yes.
Misunderstood your question.
Yes. No, she's right. So hatred, of course, is non-virtuous. Hatred is an affliction. Whatever is hatred is necessarily affliction. So that is true. Okay, so she misunderstood the question, and so she's still right with that. But actually, what we're looking at, why did I give you that Venn diagram? These Venn diagrams? Why did I do this? For you to understand pervasions, right? To check if two things have any of these four relationships. If they have the first two, they're mutually inclusive. That means they're equivalent. Then there's a pervasion. if they have three possibilities, at least from one side there is a pervasion, and with the other ones there isn't. Does that make sense?
So to have a pervasion, the whole circle has to be covered. One.
They have to be equivalent. To have a pervasion from both sides, they have to be equivalent. To have a pervasion from both sides. So,
and even from one side, the whole circle has to be covered, and not just a little bit.
yes, exactly.
Yeah.
Yeah. So, okay, if you look at it like the circles. So, in other words, A and B, if whatever is whatever is A is necessarily pervaded by B, whatever is B is necessarily pervaded by A. If that is true, A and B must be equivalent. If whatever is A is necessarily B, but whatever is B is not necessarily A, three possibilities. That's it. No more possibilities. No other way, right? If I take A and B, replace A and B with anything. Whatever is A is necessarily B, whatever is B is necessarily A. If A and B have this relationship, they're always equivalent. Okay? If their relationship is such that whatever is A is necessarily B, whatever is B is not necessarily A, the relationship is always three possibilities. And that's it. No other, it comes down to two things. Come on, how difficult can it be? Right?
It's the word pervasion still.
Yeah. It's the word pervasion.
A little bit pervaded is still pervasion. But it has to be
totally pervaded. Right? A little bit pervaded is not pervaded. Has to be totally pervaded. So in other words, you're saying yes. So some afflictions pervade some non-virtues. Some non-virtues pervade some afflictions. That's true. But here we're saying whatever is this must be pervaded totally by that. Yeah. So you all get it, you see? Right? Okay, even without saying pervaded, even without saying that, but whenever you have a correct syllogism, then that has to be given, that the reason, whatever is the reason, must be the predicate, to put it in those ways. Okay, in those words. All right, having said this, let's go back to the correct consequences. Now, in this case here, you have a different situation. You have a situation where the pervasion only needs to be accepted. If you accept that whatever is the reason, it must be the predicate, then that's enough to be a correct consequence. It could be the case, but it doesn't have to be. And this is where, I mean, the examples I've given in this diagram is here. Here it happens to be correct. Whoever is a human being, there's necessarily a possibility of them dying tomorrow. Okay? And in this case, I accept that I'm a human being, so that is also given. But what I don't accept is that I may die tomorrow. Based on this, therefore, this syllogism would establish that, this consequence would show me that there's a contradiction. You're human. So to put it differently, you're human. You're saying every human could die tomorrow? Duh, you could die tomorrow. Right? This is how Greek logicians would put it. Okay, Socrates is a man. All men are mortal, therefore Socrates is mortal. They use the same syllogism, basically. In Buddhist philosophy, it's expressed slightly differently, but same idea. And then you have the classic consequence, which is take the subject sound. It follows that it's not a product because it is permanent. All right, what do we have here? Here, the addressee holds that, first of all, sound is permanent. There were non-Buddhist schools that believed sound pervades the entire space, it's permanent, and it just expresses itself in certain versions that we hear. But that actually sound is permanent. I know, it sounds really bizarre, but yeah, they believe that sound is impermanent. Never mind the whole philosophy behind it. So sound is permanent. Pardon?
And they believe it's a product.
They believe whatever is permanent is necessarily not a product. And they believe it's a product. Yes, so at the same time, they believe that sound is a product, for instance, of our voice, or sound is the product of hitting beating a drum, for instance. So they do say that it's a product, but at the same time it's permanent. In this case, these three mutually contradictory positions are, they believe sound is permanent, but at the same time they believe that whatever is permanent is necessarily not a product, because whatever is a product must be impermanent. And again, I say, it seems like they're not stupid. Of course they're not stupid. It's not about stupidity here. It's about, in the spur of the moment, you make mistakes. Not just in the spur of the moment. I mean, let's talk about this idea of death and so forth. I mean, we intellectually know, this is also one thing we don't realize. Our mind is different from moment to moment. So we have sometimes contradictory views, not simultaneously. One moment we believe one thing, and the next moment we believe something else. And that can be contradictory. Now, with this particular syllogism here, this is given in the context of probably in the spur of the moment of a debate, who knows, someone saying, okay, sound is permanent, but sound is also a product, and whatever is impermanent must be a product. Having that view, but not realizing, because it's not like it's presented to you in one go. You debate with them and you find out, what are they thinking? At some point they say, okay, sound is permanent. At another point they say, whatever is impermanent must be a product. Then another point they say sound is a product, right? Can you think in a debate, like when you think about things, you come to this conclusion, but a moment later you come to a different conclusion because it makes more sense. And when now someone wants to remove your wrong view and they come to see you have at different times, you had these different positions, you're not even aware of that they're contradictory, then they say, take the subject sound. It follows it's not a product because it's permanent. So then you go, oh yeah, all right, I do believe it's permanent. And I do believe whatever is a product must be impermanent. So therefore, whatever is not a product must be permanent. So sound cannot be a product because it is permanent, therefore. And they come to the conclusion something is wrong. And it gives them the chance to let go of one of these views. In this case, well, they believe sound is a product, but that sound is permanent. That part they have to let go. Do you see how this works? So in the end, any kind of contradictory view, whatever contradictory view you have, for instance, I gave you the example of we believe that something beautiful is totally subjective, right? Beauty is subjective. At the same time, I believe, I don't know, the clothes I wear are beautiful. Okay, let's say I were to think that. I'm not a fan of maroon, but never mind. If I were to think the clothes I wear are beautiful, okay. And I'm thinking I have a good taste. And someone else, because of the clothes I'm wearing, and someone else doesn't have a good taste if they don't wear these clothes, right? Well, let's put it slightly differently. Give you a different example. Again, beauty lies in the eye of the beholder. Beauty is subjective. If someone wears certain clothes, they have a bad taste. Have you ever caught yourself, someone thinking that, you yourself thinking, oh, how they're dressed, that looks awful. They have no sense of what fits together, or of no sense of beauty. That's a contradiction. Whatever is beautiful is totally subjective. The clothes that these person wear show that they have bad taste. Does that make sense? So how can you see the contradiction here?
When you speak like this, you think contradiction in our mind, our view actually?
Yes, in one mind, not my view is contradictory to yours. No, in my own mind, because that's our problem. That is our problem. We believe that phenomena exist intrinsically and still believe that things can function and change. That in itself is one of the biggest contradictions. But let's not start there because it's not obvious to us that there's a contradiction. Where do we see the main contradiction? We see the contradiction in what? We see the contradiction in, for instance, What is one of our main contradictions? That we believe that something is subjective, totally subjective, right? We have a whole saying, beauty lies in the eye of the beholder. But then again, when someone else wears certain clothes, we believe them to have a bad taste.
Because me as a beholder am more important than, my
Yeah,
view is of course
because
more.
okay, that's the original cause for it, because of course I know what's beautiful. What I think is beautiful, exactly. That is the underlying reason for that. So how would you put it into a syllogism, into a consequence? Whatever, how would you put that?
Whatever I believe is beautiful.
Well, like take the subject, these clothes, they're beautiful because beauty lies in the eye of the beholder or something. I have to think about it myself actually, because beauty is subjective. So it could be, it's not, anyway, I have to think about it myself, to be honest.
Doesn't mean, like, maybe she thinks herself her clothes are not beautiful, but they're comfortable.
The thing is, it's not about that. It's not about that. She can wear whatever she wants, whether she doesn't. No, it's about me having contradictory views. That on one hand, I say, oh, beauty lies, beauty is subjective. So it's beautiful or not. She may think it's beautiful or not, or someone else may think it. And still I judge this person. So you see the contradiction in there. So it's mutually contradictory.
Maybe
Pardon?
take beauty. It follows it is not subjective because this dress is absolutely horrible.
So you need to have the reason has to be established, the pervasion has to be established, but I have to go back and think about it myself, because of my head I can't do it myself. I need to be, without.
So we're saying so you're saying you make a statement.
Yeah.
Beauty is in the eye of the beholder.
Right.
But then you're making a judgment, or you're perceiving, saying, I don't like your black t-shirt.
No, not that I don't like, but no.
Like that you're wearing. I
Yes,
perceive that
that's-
as not.
No. That's subjective. This person has bad taste.
Oh, you're perceiving the person wearing it.
Yeah,
As
having bad taste. Oh, this person, they don't even know how to dress properly. They've got such bad taste.
But you're judging. So it's a judgment.
Yeah, I'm judging based on a wrong view. You see? So this is just one example, and it's minor. It's not like the end of the world. But on one hand, I'm like using this particular saying. But on the other hand, I'm judging someone, believing there's an objective. So in other words, I'm believing there's an objective beauty because they objectively have bad taste. Saying I think they have bad taste, that's a different matter. There's the subjectivity comes in. Maybe it's a silly example, but I give this example a lot, where like rationally we believe one thing, but emotionally we believe something else. Do you identify? Can you identify with that? Right? Yeah, we emotionally we look at the world in one way, and guess what rules our actions? Our emotional response to the world. And that is usually where we're wrong. Simply because on an emotional level, we believe in intrinsic existence, in an intrinsic I and intrinsic others. That's where it all boils down to. But this is why this is so helpful, these tools, to show us the contradictions of our own view, even without understanding it right away.
So is this gone to non-duality basically? Is this trying to give us the theory behind it?
What do you mean with duality?
So like, I don't get affected if somebody I don't be judging people for wearing their clothes. I don't,
Yes.
If it's raining, it's raining.
Yes.
If it's sunny, it's sunny. If I emotionally feel like I'm like, my emotions are kind of like, I feel very emotional today, sad. Oh, that's okay, because tomorrow I'll feel maybe happy.
Right.
This theory.
Yes, so what Craig is saying, does this lead to more equanimity? That would probably be the word.
Yeah.
So more equanimity in the sense that without getting upset over things, because getting upset, getting worked up, all those are emotional responses, extreme emotional responses that come from a misconception. Just think about it. If I get angry with the weather, does that even make sense? It's an extreme response. There's a sense, I didn't get what I want. I wanted to do such and such. So letting go of that sense, I want something and I can't have it, that's an attachment. So you just let it go, okay, and you understand it's changing anyway. But the point is understanding, on one hand, well, today it doesn't rain, today it will rain, but tomorrow it may not. That's reality. Or it seems like that it rains, for instance, it seems that's intrinsically bad. But if it were to rain, it also has this good side, you know, it's like the environment gets more water and so forth. So instead of seeing it as something totally negative, you see it for what it is. And that's our problem. Our problem on one hand is we have this intelligence, intellectually we understand this, but then it clashes. There's a mutual contradictory position where it clashes with our view of reality that comes from an emotional level, and that emotional level comes from our root misconception. It's as simple as that. And so these consequences are a very powerful way, if we know how to use them, and there are other ways. I mean, but everything in Buddhism is based on that, at least in the Tibetan Buddhist tradition. So it's helpful to just get a rough sense of them. Okay, so hopefully I didn't spend this, I'm now pretty undecided, honestly. Was this a good idea or should I have just dropped it?
No, very good idea.
Well, there may be different opinions, I don't know. But so
I think it's very good idea.
you think, yeah, I don't know. Yeah, I think so too, to be honest, but I don't know. Anyway, having said all this, hopefully you have at least some sense of what this is all about, that at least there is a contradiction that becomes obvious. And if you were to go back at least to the diagram and read it again, if you have a sense, oh, I understand that, not the whole thing, but what I just read, I understood. That's it. That's all you need. Does that make sense? All right. Now let's go back to the handout itself. In addition to counteracting a wrong conception, the Prasangika school, unlike the remaining school, maintains that a consequence is the principal form of reasoning for generating inferential cognition. That's 153. According to this view, an inferential realization of slightly hidden phenomena arises primarily through consequences by revealing the untenable implications of mistaken views, the contradictory views, therefore. Consequences undermine the conceptual fabrications that obstruct a correct understanding of reality and thereby guide the mind toward the intended insight. All right? So Craig said it really well about generating this kind of equanimity, which we usually don't have. All our negative emotional responses are always untenable. What they perceive does not make sense, in other words. They're never in accordance with reality. Please realize that our afflictions, our afflictive emotions, not every affliction is an emotion. I want to clarify that, because sometimes the word affliction and afflictive emotion is used as if they were synonyms, but that's wrong. Because the root misconception is not an emotion. Our ignorance grasping at intrinsic existence is not an emotion. It is a cognitive kind of affliction versus an emotional affliction, such as anger and so forth. See, there's a difference, right?
Or the emotion in Tibetan doesn't.
No, but that's why I said the English translation is not correct. I don't have a problem with the Tibetan word. The Tibetan word doesn't talk about emotion, but there's some English translations that use the word affliction, or nyamung or klesha in Sanskrit. They call it afflictive emotion. They say every klesha, every nyamung, as it's called in Tibetan, is an afflictive emotion. But that would be saying every affliction is an emotion, but it's not. Ignorance is not an emotion. Yeah, so I'm only criticizing the use of this translation. But I mean, I'm criticizing it. Maybe if they define emotion differently and I'm not aware of that, then that's a different matter. Then I just simply don't understand. Yes, Elena?
That that means that the emotions are not first, but the thoughts are like first, and the emotions are like following the thoughts, like product of the thought,
Our emotions following our thoughts.
or thoughts following emotion. If not, every action is emotion.
Pardon?
What comes first, the emotion
Yes.
or the thought?
What comes first, the thought or the emotion? Well, the emotion is also a thought, but the cognitive kind of thinking. Well, think about it. When we get angry, do we get angry right away? Or is there a kind of cognitive process? What did the person say? Why did they say it to me? I didn't deserve that criticism. That is exaggerated. I mean, can you see yourself, or can you remember yourself in a situation when you got angry? We say I got angry without a reason, but is that really true? Or do we have reasons usually?
But we are born with the seed of anger. That means this imprint is left from the
Yes.
strong emotion or strong
Yes.
or what.
Oh, right. So it's kind of a chicken egg kind of thing. What was there first? But since beginningless time, of course, we have had emotions. We've had anger. We've had all this since beginningless time. But we can still. I mean, it's like fire and smoke, or no, a seed and a sprout. What comes first, the sprout or the seed? Well, but then you could go back since beginningless time. The sprout gives rise to a plant which produces seeds. So, right? Yeah, so in that way, it's a little bit hard to determine. But I would say, although it is true that thoughts, cognitive kind of thoughts, cognitive processes and emotions, such as negative emotions, like anger, have existed since beginningless time, it seems more that first something happens, then there's a cognitive process, which then gives rise to an emotional response. Will you agree with that? For instance,
That emotional response,
influences our...
again,
Yeah, but Alan, you know what I'm saying, right? I mean, honestly, you know what I'm saying. You're right. It again gives rise to other cognitive, but there's more of a direct link. It's like saying with the sprout, of course, it gives also again rise to seeds. That is true, but more direct. It's like before there's an emotional response such as anger, there's like, why are they saying that? That is not correct. Or attachment. Before we develop attachment towards something, there's a cognitive process, isn't there? We don't walk into a store and we attach to the phone we see on the shelf. His Holiness usually gives the example. You walk into a shop, you see something, you think it's beautiful, you start thinking, oh, if I had that, and it's useful or whatever, then desire arises, you buy it, it's yours, then attachment arises. But again, there's a cognitive process that gave rise to all these. First of all, you see it, you think of its advantages, and you're thinking, oh, that would be really good in that situation, this situation, and such. So then desire arises. Once I buy it, now it's mine. Previously, if someone were to take it off the shelf and break it, I couldn't care less. But now I bought it. Now I'm thinking, this is my phone. This is mine. It doesn't belong to anyone but me. And then if someone breaks it, we'll get upset. See the difference here? So it was cognitive processes that are not difficult. I didn't have to sit down and get a consequence and a syllogism to think, this is mine. No, we're very good at this. Yet nevertheless, there was a cognitive process which gave rise to an emotional response. Craig, does that make sense? Yeah? Okay. And it's exaggerated because there is an exaggerated aspect where we exaggerate the I and how other phenomena exist. Okay, great. Anyway, having said this, here consequences just point out the absurdities of our views. This also explains the name of the school, Prasangika or Tengyoba. Tengyo means prasanga, and prasanga means consequence. Or consequentialist, since its proponents primarily engage with the mistaken assertions of others by pointing out the untenable consequences of these positions, rather than advancing conclusions of their own. So take Nagarjuna, take Acharya Chandakirti. They've definitely realized emptiness, but they present emptiness to us in the form of consequences. Mainly. However, this does not mean that the Prasangikas do not use correct syllogisms to generate inferential understanding in another's continuum. So this is what our teachers do. Nagarjuna, Acharya Chandakirti, they do want to show us emptiness, and they use this kind of reasoning. While they initially proceed through consequences, they also employ one or more syllogisms to give rise to inferential cognition in that continuum. The other tenet schools, Vaibhashikas, Sautrantrikas, Chittamatrans, and Svatantrika Madhyamika, maintain that consequences serve only to counteract wrong conceptions, but lack the capacity to produce inferential cognition. So they say you get rid of your wrong view, like an obvious kind of an active wrong view, but you cannot realize the opposite. So in other words, you may let go of your strong kind of acquired view, especially acquired view, that everything exists intrinsically, right? Okay, so the acquired one you let go of. In the beginning, we talked about acquired wrong views. It's able to undermine acquired wrong views because those are easier to just let go of. But it doesn't mean that you realize the object. You can get, I mean, for us as Buddhists, do you still have an acquired view that everything exists intrinsically? No. The other day, I asked someone in a question in a kind of a private kind of session of answering questions. So I asked someone, how does the self appear to you? And they misunderstood. They thought I said, how does it appear to you when you put on the Prasangika head? And I said, I know I don't exist intrinsically. Yeah, right, that's true. Intellectually, on an acquired kind of level, yeah, you probably think right away, oh yeah, the self cannot be found. But there's an innate sense. Again, there's a difference between our intellectual understanding, which is acquired, versus our innate sense. You can also put it that way. So, in this situation, I said, no, I don't want you to tell me how you think as a Buddhist the self appears, but how it feels. And that was a different answer. That's a different answer, isn't it? The way it feels when someone accuses you of something you haven't done. Or when someone tells you, you're so special, you're more special than everyone else. And you go, finally someone recognized. Right? Because that's how we look at ourselves. Somehow we're more special. It's so interesting. This is where modern science is also very interesting, modern psychology, how we so easily misjudge our ability. Usually we think we're much better than we are, apparently. Right? So although we sometimes lack self-confidence, but there is a certain way in which we believe we have less mistakes than we actually do. Because we do think of ourselves. It's just a natural, right? And it's just something I remember reading about. I don't know in which context now, but that they say, yeah, usually we very much misjudge. We very easily recognize the mistakes of others, but it's much harder in our own case. Right? Yeah. So there are times when we do recognize, but we will have more of a tendency to blame others for things. Right? We have more of a tendency, I'm saying, not in all situations. So the point is, therefore, we have a slightly unrealistic view of ourselves, and to recognize that, that's part of the exercise. Yeah? And all this is, again, to bring it to the surface, because it's subconscious. A lot of it is subconscious. Modern psychology has developed means to bring it to the surface through certain tests, for instance. But ordinarily, if we never think about it, it doesn't come to the surface. So we're not even aware of our skewed thoughts. Yeah. And that's the first step. Without feeling like you want to throw up, if I think about the best way to go is to laugh about it. Take it with humor. A lot of it is about self-discovery. And what you find is not always nice. Well, take it with humor. Right? Because it is funny. Okay. All right, and then a syllogism. Now, consequences are hopefully a little bit clearer. A syllogism is more straightforward. A correct syllogism consists of 4 parts. A predicate, a correct reason, and an example. Okay, subject, predicate, correct reason, and an example. It is expressed in the structure. Take the subject X. Not it follows. It follows implies that there's an absurdity possibly involved, right? No, it is X. It is Y because it is Z. For example, like D. As in the case of a consequence, X represents the subject, Y the predicate, Z the reason, and D the example. Okay, D is the example, although consequences don't need to have an example. They can have, but a syllogism always has an example. You always posit an example. While the statement X is Y constitutes this thesis, as before, except there it follows that X is Y. The variables X, Y, Z, and D may each be replaced by any phenomenon. Okay. All right. So, however, unlike a consequence, the predicate is not expressed with it follows. I already mentioned that. Because a syllogism consists of a thesis that's factually concordant. That's the difference. The consequences don't have to be factually concordant. They have to just point out the absurdity of the addressee. So even if you hold three totally wrong views that are contradictory, that's even possible. It's not like we have two correct views and then one wrong view. No, we sometimes have three incorrect views that are mutually exclusive. Makes sense? Right? So anything, you can use anything you want, which is in the debate, you say the most absurd things sometimes, but only in response to what the other person asserts, to show them these consequences. So sometimes you go hypothetically, the other person asserts that there is a self-sufficient, substantially existent I. All right, let's assume there is. And you debate on that basis, right? And then that self, let's say that self, they say it's permanent. Well, if it really existed, it would have to be impermanent. Because it would be like an owner. If there were a self-sufficient, substantially existent I that existed separate from mind and body, like an owner, would that be permanent or impermanent? An owner, is an owner permanent or impermanent? It controls mind and body, right? It controls them. Or if you believe that there's a controller God, permanent or impermanent? Should be impermanent. But there are certain philosophical systems that believe there is a creator God and that creator is permanent. How could God influence other things? How can it affect communicating with us? It has to be, you see, so you take that view, if that is part of your intellectual exchange, and say, look, okay, if there's God, all right, but at least God has to be impermanent. So it follows that such a subject, God, could not communicate with us because God is permanent. Could not interact with us because God is permanent. That would be a logical consequence. You believe that something, whatever communicates with someone must be impermanent. God is permanent, but communicates with us. You see? What does it mean to communicate? What does it mean? How does communication take place? Ask the other person, how does it take place? You have a thought, you have an intention to say something, based on that you communicate. There's change, there's a process, there's a mental process, right? So we say, oh, God had this idea, but God is permanent. Huh? Had an idea and then not, there's debate with someone, you're asking all these questions. First, you want to establish these incorrect views. And then when you're ready, you throw the consequence at them. And then they go, oh. And oftentimes they let go and you say, ta. Finished. Right? Or they insist and you try again. But can you see the beauty of that? Can you see the beauty of that? I'm not saying you can do it. I mean, of course you can do it. You can all do it. 4 hours every day with the right kind of, classes every day. You can all do it. Don't feel frustrated. I thought I couldn't do it. I was convinced I couldn't do it. I was convinced. I'm not a logical person. I'm more arty, which I'm not, but. My parents always told me I was really good at art, but they're the only ones who put my pictures on the wall. And I showed my pride and joy in this one picture to a real artist, and I just laughed. So, no, seriously, no. I know, but my form, yeah, I know, but you know, this is really not art. I mean, my stuff. But the thing is, you know, but my mom always thought so. Yeah, but that's just a ridiculous cartoon.
There's no probation that an artist cannot think logically.
Oh, there you go. There's there's doors. She's right. That is true. That is true. But that was my wrong view. I had this wrong view that logicians. Okay, I have to explain my whole wrong view. Logicians are nerds, and I'm not a nerd because I'm an arty-farty person. Okay, all wrong views. Of course, it's all based on a wrong view. But what I'm trying to tell you is like I definitely had that wrong view. I couldn't do logic, and of course none of my views made any sense. But I'm just saying, okay. Oh, there's so many of them. That's what I'm saying. It's really funny. It actually is really funny. So never mind. Going back to the syllogism here. I don't know about this class. I'm no longer on a safe side. I'm really. Next time I'll be totally alone when I go. Okay, never mind. I'll just go on. So with the syllogism, as a correct syllogism consists of 4 parts: a subject, a predicate. Okay, we did that. And like a consequence, the predicate is not expressed with "it follows." No, and it consists of a thesis that is factually concordant. So this is in accordance with reality and a logically correct reason which establishes or proves that thesis. Of course, only if that reason has a relation to the predicate, either because they're synonymous or because there are 3 possibilities. Okay? Then this reason is able to establish the predicate. So you see the connection? Okay. The example D serves to illustrate the pervasion between the reason and the predicate. Okay. Now that seems pretty simple, but of course it's never simple. Because the next part now is a syllogism. For it to be logically correct, it must possess 3 qualities. And these 3 qualities are called the 3 modes, which must be realized by the person to whom the syllogism is addressed in order for them to eventually understand the thesis. So there's some work that has to come from your own side. That's very important to understand. There's certain work you have to do. Why am I stressing this? Because in the 2nd chapter of the Pramanavartika is widely known, there's reasoning that establishes the existence of past and future life. And then people read that reasoning and go, it doesn't work. It doesn't work. This reasoning doesn't work for me. Well, because they haven't, for them, the 3 modes are not given. They haven't done the preparatory work. They haven't understood the property of the subject. They haven't realized the forward pervasion. They haven't understood the reverse pervasion. It's a process we have to go through. For instance, let me give you another example. If I don't know that wherever there's a certain quality of fire, there's necessarily smoke, if I don't know that, then you can shout at me all day long, there's a fire in your neighbor's house because there's smoke billowing out of the window. And I go, so what? Right? What was that?
At some point you realize the house is not standing there.
Yeah, but then it's too late. The point is like, I want to know that there's fire in there to call, 911 or whatever you call in India or in other countries. So the point is, here I want to know there's fire or not for a certain reason. And in this case, I wouldn't know because I don't know the relation between smoke and fire, which means it's only a correct reason if I understand these 3 aspects. And usually we do. I can observe directly that there's smoke billowing from my neighbor's house. That I can see. So the property of the subject I have established. What is the property of the subject? That the subject is the reason, in the sense that the presence of fire, the presence of smoke is given in the case of this house. So the subject is inside my neighbor's house. The predicate is there's fire. The reason is because there's smoke. The presence of smoke I've established on the basis of my neighbor's house. I've also have established that wherever there's smoke, there's necessarily fire, and wherever there's no fire, there's also no smoke. All three. Property of the subject, presence of smoke in my neighbor's house. Forward pervasion, wherever there's smoke, there's necessarily fire. Reverse pervasion, wherever there's no fire, there's necessarily no smoke. And I'm not talking about steam, right? Don't get me wrong, it's kind of a particular quality of smoke. So the three modes of the reason may be explained simply put as follows. In the schematic syllogism presented above, the reason Z is the property of the subject. So smoke, the presence of smoke is the property of the subject, is the property of this particular moment of my neighbor's house, because the reason Z is a property of the subject X. So here, the reason X is a property of the subject X, or in this case, my neighbor's house. In other words, the reason Z, the presence of smoke, is a feature of my neighbor's house in that moment, because there is smoke coming out. So I'm putting it in a very complicated way, but you can replace this now with anything.
What about the example?
Yeah, the example I've given in the handout is take the subject sound. It's impermanent because it's a product. You remember previously I kept playing around. It is not a product. That was part of the consequence.
About the smoke and the fire.
Oh, the smoke and the fire. All right. So take the subject, my neighbor's house, out of which smoke billows. There is fire inside because there's smoke coming out of the window, right? So in this case, what is the property of the subject? That in that particular house, or in that particular house, there's smoke. There's the presence of smoke, or in relation to this particular house, there's the presence of smoke. Wherever there's smoke, there's necessarily fire. Wherever there's no fire, right? So
Geshe-la, the reason has to be more obvious than the predicate.
that's
Or
true.
more simpler.
This-
Because sometimes
yeah.
I find the reason sometimes more complicated, and I go like, oh,
Yeah. I have said the three modes of the reasons may be explained simply put as follows, because there is like a whole subject matter just on the correct reason that you study for a month on end. So no surprise, there's more to it. But all you need to know for studying this is what I'm going to give you here. And you're right. Usually the reason needs to be something that is more obvious than the predicate. What would be an example of something where you thought the reason was
I
not?
don't know, sometimes it seems so, pulled by the hair that I so.
Yeah, oh well, sometimes they're just examples, and they may not be, strictly speaking, correct reasons. But ordinarily, I mean, you could argue this. For instance, what is the king of reasoning for emptiness? There's a syllogism given that is described. The psalmist has said it many times. It's the king of reasoning. Dependent arising. So take the subject, my eye. If it is not, it doesn't exist intrinsically because it's dependently arisen. Okay, that's the king of reasoning. It's a correct syllogism. But here you may argue, well, but the reason is more subtle than emptiness, than lack of intrinsic existence or the absence of intrinsic existence. Why is dependent origination, dependent arising more subtle than emptiness? It actually is. Dependent arising is more subtle than emptiness. How do we determine whether something is more subtle than something else?
Whether we can see it or not.
Pardon?
Whether we can see it develop.
Yes, okay, you're going in the right direction. That one is easier understood. Yeah, easier identified. And usually you have to realize one before you realize the other. Which means first you have to realize emptiness before you can realize dependent arising. What? That seems totally the opposite. We keep talking about dependent arising all the time in order to understand emptiness. That's our main reasoning. Okay, but here there is a little trick. The subtlest level of dependent arising, the very, very subtle level, the subtlest level, that can only be understood after you understand emptiness. But when we use the dependent arising as a proof for emptiness, we're using a coarser level. It's easier understood, right? So the subtlest level would be that nothing exists in and of itself except being merely labeled. Being merely labeled. So you're already assuming that nothing exists inherently and it's just labeled. That is the subtlest level, and that means you need to realize emptiness fast. But when we say, I don't exist, take the subject I don't exist inherently or intrinsically because I'm dependently risen, it's the coarse type of dependent arising that is given as a reason here. So when you encounter this in certain situation, it could be, as in this example, that although dependent arising in general, especially on the subtlest level, is subtler than the subtlest level of emptiness, where I don't even need to say the subtlest level of emptiness, it's subtler than emptiness, but it is here used as a reason from the point of view of its coarser aspect. Does that make sense? Right? Okay. All right. Oh, I cover a lot. This. If nothing at all, and you're all confused, I covered quite a few things. Yes. So it's always said, for instance, what is impermanent and product? What is their relationship? Impermanent and product. Of the four, pardon?
Inclusive.
Which is inclusive, equivalent. Okay. Is one coarser than the other? If they're mutually inclusive, doesn't that mean that they have to be equally coarse or equally subtle? No. No. Dependent arising and the absence of intrinsic existence are equivalent. Whatever is dependently risen lacks intrinsic existence. Whatever lacks intrinsic existence is dependently arisen. So they are equivalent, but one is coarser than the other. One is harder to understand than the other.
Are they mutually inclusive?
Pardon?
Are they mutually inclusive?
Because whatever is one is not necessarily the other. Whatever is impermanent must be a product. Whatever is a product must be impermanent. And still, one is coarser, one is easier to understand than the other. Which one is it? Yes.
Sorry, but when you say coarser and subtler, you mean easier and harder to understand?
Yeah.
Not surface and
Yes. Usually, that's what it means when we talk about coarser and subtler. For instance, subtle atoms, the very, very subtle atoms, they're subtler because we have a hard time seeing them. In fact, we can't see them. This wall is coarse because we can see it. Even in our daily language, coarser, what's coarse anger? The one that you see on my face.
Surface and inside. Surface, what we can see, inside, what we feel.
No, not necessarily. It's usually coarse and subtle, especially in the Buddhist context. Subtle means something that is harder to detect. Coarse means something that is easier to detect. Again, going back to anger, when we talk about coarse anger is a strong type of anger that I'm aware of. I may not be aware of my subtle anger, but I'm more aware of, and that you may be aware of. My face turns red, and you can see my expression. I look very tense. My hands are, my fists are clenched. About to get up to to have a fist fight or something. Then it's coarse anger. Subtler anger. I may be smiling angelically at you, but be boiling inside. I'm not even aware of it. So in that case, coarse and subtle, I think, is pretty obvious. And again, when we talk about coarse and subtle, like certain ideas that are, although like impermanent and product are equivalent, but one is harder to understand than the other. Which one is it? Impermanent is more difficult to understand. Why? Because we're talking about subtle impermanent, like constant change. And everything appears to be solid and non-changing around us, right? In fact, we're under the illusion that a lot of things are permanent. So therefore, it's difficult to understand that. While product, being a product arising from causes and conditions, we can even observe that. If you look long enough at a sprout, a seed giving rise to a sprout, you can see it. So in that sense, being a product is coarser, while impermanence refers to the subtlest level of impermanence, which is the constant change. And that, we're unable to detect that. So therefore, one is coarser than the other, but we can use that coarser concept, being a product, in order to establish the subtler concept, which is impermanence. I used it before. I said, if something is produced, every moment must give rise to the next, must give rise to the next. So it must be constantly changing, because every moment gives rise to the next, which means they're not identical. See? You can actually establish that everything exists intrinsically based on cause and effect. Yeah. All right. So what she says is absolutely right. It's always the coarser that establishes the subtler. You don't establish that there's fire in your neighbor's house because there's smoke in your neighbor's house because there's fire. I mean, you were less likely to see the fire than the smoke. And anyway, you want to find out about the fire, you don't worry about the smoke. Okay. Anyway, all right. So, yes. So the forward pervasion, I don't even know whether I should go on. Oh, anyway, we're done. Just one page.
No, but you also did another handout.
Pardon? Say again?
You also wrote another handout.
I did give another handout? No.
You did
No,
another,
we looked at it.
You looked at another handout, I know. Yeah.
So,
Yeah, and I talked about a lot of other things. No, that's right.
First 2 pages.
Yeah, okay. So it was 2 pages, strictly speaking.
no consequences, no?
All right, anyway, so yes, Alan, last.
Yeah, but regarding these syllogisms and so on, like the two people is usually two people debating or having a conversation. They also have to agree on the definitions of the different words. So I find many times when I'm talking to other people that the meaning of permanence for me is one thing from a Buddhist side, but for them it's typically something else.
Alan makes a very important point. He's saying, well, when you say two people debating, isn't it really difficult? Because sometimes we're actually, I guess you're saying that, we're actually asserting the same thing, but we're using terminology differently. So don't we have to first make sure we use the same terminology? Absolutely. That's why the study of philosophy, there's probably one reason why the study of philosophy is called the study of definitions. Because everything is defined. First of all, before you start debating. In fact, when I start a debate with you, there's always an introduction before I start trying to find any kind of contradictions in your view. So I start usually by establishing the topic. I'm saying, okay, I'm asking this person, there's a quote in a particular text. I give the quote and I ask you to identify the quote and ask you in which context has it been given. So that already leads you, if you know the text well, it leads you towards the topic. So you say, oh, it's the Four Noble Truths, for instance. And then I ask you for the definitions. What is the definition for suffering? What is the definition of this? I'll even ask every aspect of the definitions. I may ask, how do you explain them? Right? So once that's established, now I know what the terminology that I'm going to use in this debate. I've asked you to establish it. Now I know this is how you look at things. And I'm still looking for contradictions. And so, in the end, sometimes we may disagree and I may ask you to redefine it and I realize I've just misunderstood and I just ask you to set it right. But that's all part of the debate process. And you're absolutely right. First, we need to define things and make sure we define it in the right way. Yeah, absolutely. Last, yours?
I have had a contradiction a long time ago that was postponed. But
Okay.
now I want to bring it. Because you said to keep on your thing is a natural attitude or
Response.
or whatever. And I would contradict it because it depends on the situation. For example, when you have a bread and you eat within 20 people and nobody else has a bread and all are hungry, it wouldn't be natural to hold on this bread just for yourself. It would be much more natural to share it.
Okay.
So
Okay.
this is not an absolute, this is for me also not perversion.
Okay, okay. Well, Doris is saying, when I talked about, for instance, I gave the example of, you know, walk into a store, you buy an iPhone, and then you hold on to it, it's yours. So she's saying that is no pervasion, because some people, they have, for instance, when there's not enough bread, you may actually share the bread that you have. And, you know, if you're in a group of people, you may share the bread with everyone. It's not that that's always the case. And of course, I didn't say that this is always true. I gave this as an example, a general example. You walk into a store and, you know, sometimes people even give away their phones, though that's rarer than pieces of bread. I've not witnessed that much, you know, like with a phone, but with a piece of bread, yeah, where your survival is dependent on that. But there's no pervasion either way. So sometimes people, they hoard the bread and try to hide it from other people because they're worried about their own survival. Sometimes they give it only to their children, and sometimes they share it with everyone.
Yes, but how could they put this
In that context.
in the
Yeah.
reasoning?
Right. So to give this in the context of why one reaction is based on reality and the other is not, well, the view that my happiness and my survival is more important than others is actually based on a wrong conception. Based on my mind, according to my mind, yes, I see my survival as more important, but not the survival of others. That's an exaggerated view. In fact, my survival is dependent on others. If it wasn't for others, I wouldn't survive in actuality. So to share with everyone else, in the long term, I reap the benefit. That's what I want. It makes much more sense to change it. Maybe there's a short-term benefit. Maybe I die. But, you know, since there's rebirth, I also have the benefit that I've shared it with others. And in the long term, I'm more likely to survive. So it just makes more sense. For my own benefit, it makes much more sense. But I believe we have this tendency, not only do we misperceive the I, we have this constant need for short-term gratification, right? I mean, it's not just about, we want short-term happiness and we sacrifice long-term happiness all the time. Does that make sense? Yeah. So anyway, having said all that, next time we'll definitely continue. So no more about the logic of all that. You can read, of course, the handout if you want, like the syllogisms. I'm not going to go into more details. I believe I've established enough to then be able to present you with the debates that are usually done in this context. So now it'll be clear what needs to be done. All right, so let's take a moment to dedicate whatever virtue we've accumulated. In this known circled land, you are the source of benefit and bliss. Avalokiteshvara, Tenzin Gyatso, please remain in life until samsara ends. May the precious Bodhi mind, not yet born, arise and grow. May that born have no decline, but increase forevermore. May the precious view of emptiness, not yet born, arise and grow. May that born have no decline, but increase forevermore. All right, thank you. Have a nice weekend. Or what's left of it.